My name is James. I'm 32. Have you ever felt a moment rip through your life, leaving a permanent crack? For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday, in a small, stale downtown room, thick with the scent of old paper and unspoken tension. It was the day my grandfather's will was to be read. I walked in, a knot of dread battling a fragile hope. The low hum of fluorescent lights amplified the silence, each flicker jarring my nerves. My brother Michael was already there. Perched on a mahogany chair, eyes narrowed, fixed on me. No greeting, just a tight, smug smile that churned my stomach. We hadn't truly spoken since Grandpa passed, only terse calls about arrangements. His silent accusation filled the space, a heavy presence between us. Our long-standing rivalry, once smoothed by Grandpa's gentle hand, now felt raw, a throbbing wound in the quiet room. Michael finally broke the hush, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, barely audible above the hum, but sharp. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into my eyes. "Don't look so surprised, James," he sneered, gaze unwavering. "You really thought you'd get anything? After everything? Grandpa loved you, sure, but he wasn't blind. He knew what you did. You're cut out, completely. Zero." A cold wave washed over me, numbing my ears. The room blurred. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat. Cut out? The words echoed, hollow and disbelieving. It wasn't about money. It was the cruel implication, the betrayal Michael so eagerly confirmed. It was about my grandfather's love, the crushing idea it had been withdrawn. I swallowed hard, a dry, raspy sound escaping. My voice failed. Just then, the door creaked open. Judge Henderson, kind eyes but a stern demeanor, walked in. He carried a thick manila envelope, sealed with red wax. The sight jolted me. This was it, the official word. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and cleared his throat. Michael straightened, a confident smirk playing on his lips. My palms were sweating, hands trembling, as I clenched them into fists, desperate to steady myself. Judge Henderson skipped pleasantries. He shuffled papers, movements precise. Each rustle, a tiny explosion in the suffocating quiet. He looked at us, gaze lingering on Michael's expectant face, then my own, a mask of confusion and hurt. "We are here today to execute the last will and testament of Arthur Miller," he began, voice calm, professional, yet carrying undeniable weight. "Before I proceed with formal distribution, Mr. Miller requested a specific personal letter be read aloud." Michael's smirk faltered, replaced by confusion. The air thickened further, now with unexpected curiosity. Mark's sneer was a familiar ache, a bitter echo of every slight, every competition he'd ever manufactured between us. He claimed I was cut out. The words hung in the stale air of the courtroom, heavy with a certainty that twisted my gut. How could he know? More importantly, why would Grandpa do that? My mind drifted, away from the sterile beige walls and the hushed whispers, back to the dusty, sun-drenched porch of Grandpa's old farm. That's where the true story began. Not here, amidst lawyers and legal jargon. Grandpa wasn't just a man. He was the bedrock of our scattered family, a quiet giant who smelled of pipe tobacco and the rich earth he tended with such loving care. His hands, gnarled with age and honest work, had always been a source of comfort, never judgment. Mark, on the other hand, saw those hands as holding the keys to a fortune, not a legacy. He was always calculating, always angling, even as a kid. I remember him, no older than 10, already haggling with Grandpa over the price of old baseball cards, while I just wanted to hear stories about the war. "Come on, Grandpa, you gotta give me a better deal. These are collector's items." Mark would whine, his eyes narrowed even then. "Son, everything has its worth, but not everything has a price tag," Grandpa would say, a gentle smile playing on his lips, never quite reaching his eyes when he looked at Mark. It was a subtle difference, but I always noticed. Mark was focused on the worth in dollar signs. I was content with the warmth of Grandpa's presence. Our divergent paths, even back then, were clear. while I'd spend summers helping Grandpa mend fences, learning the names of wildflowers, and listening to his quiet wisdom, Mark was always busy with some get-rich-quick scheme or complaining about the lack of Wi-Fi in the sticks. He'd always considered himself the prodigal grandson, the one destined for greatness, the one who'd bring honor and substantial money to the family name. I was just James, the dreamer, the one who found solace in the creak of old floorboards and the quiet hum of a summer afternoon. Mark often implied I was naive, even foolish, for not chasing bigger ambitions. "What are you going to do, James? Become a farmer like Grandpa? That's small-time stuff. We're meant for more than dirt under our nails." His voice, even in my memory, carried that condescending edge. It always had. The very idea of Grandpa disinheriting me, a concept Mark so eagerly championed, felt like a betrayal not just of me, but of the very essence of who Grandpa was. He valued connection, not conquest. He saw people, not assets. "Family is the only true wealth, James," he'd whispered to me once, his voice raspy, as we watched a sunset paint the fields gold. "Everything else, it fades." These words resonated deeply, so profoundly that Mark's malicious claim felt less like a threat and more like a cruel joke, utterly out of sync with the man we both knew. Yet the seed of doubt, planted by Mark's confident smirk, had taken root, threatening to choke out the comforting memories of Grandpa's love. The air in Mr. Henderson's office felt thick, heavy with unspoken expectations, tinged with old paper. I sat rigidly on the plush, uncomfortable chair, my gaze fixed on the mahogany desk, a barrier to the truth. Each tick of the clock amplified the silence, stretching it taut with unbearable tension. My throat was dry, a knot of anxiety tightening with every second. This was the moment of truth. A subtle shift announced Mark's arrival. He strode in with practiced confidence, his dark eyes sweeping me with a dismissive glance. Mark always had that arrogant air, disdain for anything less than perfect. He slicked a stray lock of dark hair, mirroring Grandpa's silver mane, and took the seat opposite me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well, James," he began, his voice a low, knowing murmur. "Fancy seeing you here. I almost expected you to skip, given everything." He leaned back, crossing one leg, his gaze challenging. My jaw clenched. "What does that mean, Mark?" I managed, voice strained. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, Grandpa's wishes. He always did have a peculiar sense of humor, didn't he?" His words carried a veiled accusation. Mark had always been the golden child, the heir apparent in his mind. He systematically undermined my bond with Grandpa, painting me as unreliable, distant, ungrateful. It was a silent campaign, waged with subtle jabs and loaded comments whenever Grandpa was within earshot, festering between us like slow poison. The injustice made my hands tremble slightly. "Don't pretend you don't know," Mark continued, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Grandpa talked to me, James. He was quite clear about his intentions regarding his legacy. He wouldn't just leave it to someone who didn't appreciate his sacrifice." His eyes narrowed, smug. "You should be grateful you're even here." My blood ran cold. The implication was unmistakable, a direct hit to my relationship with Grandpa. "What are you talking about, Mark?" I pushed back, voice barely above a whisper, laced with fear. "What did Grandpa tell you?" He simply smiled, a tight, unpleasant curl of his lips. "Let's just say, James, some are meant for great things, and some are not." He made sure the will reflected that. "You were cut out, plain and simple." The world tilted, my breath caught. The air in the solicitor's office was thick, not just with the scent of old paper and dust, but with an unspoken tension that pulsed between Michael and me. He leaned back in his polished leather chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, his gaze flicking between the stoic figure of Judge Albright and my own clenched fists. Every time I shifted, the sound of my grandfather's antique grandfather clock, ticking softly in the corner, seemed to amplify the silence, each tick a tiny hammer blow against my chest. This wasn't just about money. It was about the stories, the slights, the years of unspoken resentment finally bubbling to the surface. "I told you, James," Michael whispered, his voice laced with patronizing pity. "Grandpa wasn't exactly thrilled with your life choices. He always valued hard work, dedication, things you seem to have overlooked." My jaw tightened, my eyes narrowing, but I held my tongue. There was no point in dignifying his taunts with a response, especially not here, not now. I knew my grandfather better than anyone, or so I thought. He was a man of principles, yes, but also of profound, quiet love. The idea that he'd cut me out, based on Michael's interpretation of my life, felt like a cruel distortion of the man I adored. Judge Albright, a man whose presence commanded respect without a single raised voice, finally cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. His silver hair, meticulously combed, caught the faint light filtering through the heavy drapes. He held a thick, cream-colored envelope, its edges crisp and uncreased. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice a low, steady rumble, "we are here today at the request of the late Mr. Arthur Henderson to read his last will and testament." He paused, his gaze sweeping over us, lingering for a fraction of a second on Michael's triumphant face, then on my own anxious one. "Before I proceed with the formal distribution of assets, Mr. Henderson included a rather unusual addendum." Michael straightened in his seat, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before he quickly regained his composure, replacing it with an expectant grin. He probably thought it was a final damning instruction against me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. What could be so unusual? Had Grandpa really left a final hurtful message? The thought made my stomach churn, a bitter acid rising in my throat. I pictured Grandpa in his study, surrounded by his books, his pipe smoke curling around him like a benevolent ghost. He had always been so fair, so kind. This wasn't like him. The judge opened the envelope with deliberate slowness, extracting a single folded sheet of paper that looked distinctly different from the official documents. It wasn't typewritten. It was handwritten, in Grandpa's familiar, slightly shaky script. A wave of nostalgia, sharp and painful, washed over me. I remembered that handwriting from birthday cards, from notes left on the kitchen counter. Michael, however, shifted impatiently, clearly eager for the pronouncement of my disinheritance. "This," Judge Albright stated, holding up the sheet, "is a personal letter. Mr. Henderson explicitly requested it be read aloud prior to any other clauses in the will. He specified it was to be his final, personal communication to those present." "A letter?" Michael scoffed, a sneer on his face. "What for? More of his old-fashioned ramblings?" The judge merely shot him a stern look, silencing him immediately. He then began to read, his voice taking on a different cadence, softer, almost reverent, as if channeling Grandpa's own words. "To my dear grandsons, James and Michael," he read, and the words, written in my grandfather's distinctive hand, seemed to fill the room, echoing with a warmth I hadn't felt since his passing. "If you are hearing these words, it means I have embarked on my final journey, and I pray you both remember the love I held for you, and the lessons I tried to impart. My only regret in leaving this world is the persistent inability of my eldest grandson, Michael, to grasp the true meaning of family, and his misguided belief that material wealth dictates worth. Before we discuss anything else, I must clarify a most important detail that seems to have eluded Michael for far too long." A cold knot tightened in my gut as my brother's words continued to reverberate through my mind. Cut out of the will. It felt like a cruel joke, a malicious twist in a story that was already laden with grief. How could Grandpa, the man who taught me to tie my shoes, to bait a hook, to appreciate the quiet wisdom of a sunrise over the lake, simply erase me from his life's final declaration? My chest ached with the absurdity of it all. I remembered one sweltering summer afternoon, no older than 10, when Grandpa and I sat on his porch, shelling peas. The rhythmic snap of the pods, the soft thud of peas hitting the metal bowl. He'd paused, looking at me over his spectacles. "James," he'd said, his voice raspy, "you have a good heart. Never let anyone tell you different. That's more valuable than any gold. His words had felt like a warm blanket, a deep truth etched into my young soul. Could that man, the one who saw my heart, truly disinherit me? The image of his worn, calloused hands, always ready to help, to fix, to comfort, kept flashing before my eyes. He'd taught me patience, the kind that comes from waiting for a fish to bite or a garden to grow. He'd taught me resilience, how to pick myself up after a scraped knee or a bruised ego. My brother's claim was a direct affront to every memory, every lesson, every quiet bond we had shared. It felt like a betrayal, not just from my brother, but a ghost of one from Grandpa himself. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the toxic thought. No, it couldn't be. Grandpa loved me. He always said I reminded him of himself when he was young, stubborn and full of questions. Stepping into the cool, hushed lobby of Miller and Associates, a wave of sterile calm washed over me, a sharp contrast to the turmoil within. The scent of polished wood and old paper was surprisingly comforting, a scent of order and due process. I walked towards the receptionist's desk, the carpet muffling my footsteps, making the journey feel strangely ethereal. My gaze swept across the framed degrees and accolades on the wall, each one a testament to legal precision, to facts and figures. But what about emotion? What about family? Good morning. A crisp voice greeted me from behind the desk, pulling me back to the present. The receptionist, a woman with neatly pinned hair and an efficient smile, looked up. You must be Mr. Miller, correct? James Miller? I nodded, my throat surprisingly dry. Yes, that's me, James. My voice came out as a quiet whisper. I'm here to see Mr. Davies about my grandfather's will. She gave a small, polite smile. Ah, yes. We're expecting you. Mr. Davies will be with you shortly. Please take a seat. He's just finishing up with your brother. My stomach clenched. My brother. So Charles was already here, spinning his version of events, solidifying his twisted narrative. The thought made my skin crawl. The waiting area was plush, silent, almost too calm. Every tick of the ornate clock on the wall felt amplified, each second stretching into an eternity. My palms grew clammy, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew deep down that soon the truth, whatever it might be, would be laid bare. My breath hitched as Judge Thompson's gaze lifted, sweeping the room before settling on me. And now, he stated, his voice now solemn, we move to specific bequests. My grandfather, Arthur Sullivan, always believed in intention, even in his final arrangements. This section is prefaced by a personal note, instructions he intended for all present. The air thickened, suffocating. This was it. The truth would spill out. He cleared his throat, resuming, My dearest family, gathered here, you're likely wondering about my estate. But more vital than possessions, I impart a final lesson. To my grandson Mark, you possess a keen business mind, a drive I admired and at times worried about. Your ambition is a powerful force. For you, Mark, I leave the summer cottage in Maine, a place I hope brings quiet moments away from relentless gain. It needs work, but then, so do we all. Mark's initial smirk dissolved into a slight frown at the cottage mention, too rustic for his tastes. He quickly recomposed, a subtle nod replacing his sneer, likely already calculating its resale value. Then the judge paused, adjusting his spectacles, his eyes finding mine. My palms were slick. And to my grandson James. Judge Thompson continued, his voice softening. My dear James, you always saw the world through a lens of empathy, of quiet observation. Your heart beats to a rhythm uniquely your own. It's a rhythm often drowned out, but I believe it is your greatest strength. A lump formed in my throat. Grandpa truly understood me, his words a final, gentle embrace even through the judge's formal tone. I waited, heart pounding, for the expected dismissal, for the confirmation of Mark's cruel prophecy. But what came next, what Judge Thompson read, was anything but dismissal. It was a challenge, a truth, and a legacy I never dared to imagine. The courtroom air had solidified, dense and suffocating. My eyes fixed on Judge Albright, his face a mask of neutrality, sensing anticipation. Across from me, Mark's permanent smirk promised my humiliation. I couldn't look away. Judge Albright adjusted his dark-rimmed glasses, a slight tremor in his hand, smoothing the aged document. The paper rustled, a crisp, mocking sound in the profound silence. He cleared his throat. His voice, deeper than I remembered, filled the room. The last will and testament of Robert Bob Harrison, dated October 14, 2022. The formal preamble flowed, legal jargon about sound mind and body, executors, final arrangements. My mind drifted, bracing for the punchline. Mark's posture straightened, eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. My palms were slick with cold sweat. Now, to the disposition of my estate, the judge continued, his voice shifting to a more personal cadence. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on Mark, then on me. My dearest grandsons, Mark and James, you are both very different men, and you have both brought me joy, and sometimes, indeed, a certain measure of frustration. A ripple of nervous coughs broke the silence. My heart leaped. This was it, Grandpa explaining why I was being cut out. I braced for the blow. Mark leaned forward, a knowing grin playing on his lips, rehearsed for this. For many years, the judge's voice gained quiet intensity. There has been a narrative, a whisper, that one of you might feel less favored, perhaps even estranged due to past misunderstandings. Some of you, indeed, may have heard claims that James, my younger grandson, has been disinherited, cut out entirely. Let me be unequivocally clear on this matter, so that there is no doubt, no further room for speculation, and most importantly, no lingering bitterness between those I hold dear. The judge then looked directly at Mark, eyes piercing, before slowly shifting his gaze to me. My will explicitly states, to my grandson, Mark Harrison, I leave the sum of $100,000 as a foundation for his future endeavors, and to remind him of the hard work and dedication I always admired. Mark's triumphant smile faltered, confusion crossing his face. Not what he'd implied. The judge paused, letting the words hang, allowing Mark's uncertainty to register. My own mind raced. If Mark only got that, what did it mean for me? A tiny seed of hope had begun to sprout. I stared, barely breathing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. A hushed reverence settled over the room, so profound it seemed to pull the very air from my lungs. Every eye, including Mark's, was fixated on Judge Albright as he adjusted his spectacles. He took a slow, deliberate breath, and then Grandpa's carefully chosen words, his very essence, began to fill the sterile chamber. My dearest grandsons, Mark and James, the judge's voice resonated, adopting a gravitas that wasn't his own. I've lived a full life, seen much, and learned even more. I've come to understand that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the richness of spirit, the strength of character, and the unwavering kindness one extends to the world. My breath hitched. Mark shifted beside me, an almost imperceptible tremor in his posture. The judge continued, his tone unwavering. Mark, my eldest, you have always sought to build, to acquire, to establish a name for yourself in the bustling world. You pursued your ambitions with a vigor that, at times, overshadowed the simple joys of connection. For this drive and in recognition of your burgeoning business, I have set aside a significant portion of my financial holdings, enough to bolster your ventures and secure your family's future, but with a caveat. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Mark's head snapped up, his initial smirk fading into a tight, questioning line. A caveat? He blurted out, unable to contain himself. The judge merely gave him a stern look, pausing before resuming. Yes, Mark, the judge echoed Grandpa's voice. This inheritance comes with the explicit condition that you establish a foundation in my name, dedicated to supporting young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, a way to give back what you have so eagerly taken. My hope, Mark, is that in helping others build their dreams, you will find a greater fulfillment than any balance sheet can offer. A faint, almost imperceptible gasp escaped from somewhere behind me. I could feel Mark's rigid tension beside me, his jaw clenching. He stared at the judge, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. Then the judge turned a page, the rustle of paper loud in the silence. And James, my youngest, my heart. The words softened, making my own chest ache with a familiar ache for my grandfather. You, my boy, have always seen the world with different eyes. You sought to preserve, to understand, to cherish the quiet beauty often overlooked. You found value not in what was new, but in what endured, not in what was bought, but in what was grown. Your hands, James, have the touch of the earth, and your spirit, the patience of a slow-growing oak. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, unbidden. It has come to my attention, the judge continued, his gaze briefly meeting mine, that there has been some unfortunate misinformation circulated regarding your position in my will. Let me be unequivocally clear. My legacy is not merely in the currency I leave behind, but in the principles I upheld. James, to you, I bequeath not just the family farm, its fields, and its venerable farmhouse, but also the full, unencumbered freedom to nurture it, to continue its story, and to make it your own in every sense. This includes all its assets, its historical artifacts, and the full operating capital required to ensure its perpetual care. The words hung in the air, a physical weight. My vision blurred. Mark's chair scraped against the polished floor as he half rose, his face a mask of furious disbelief. "That's not possible," he roared, his voice cracking with outrage. "He said I was cut out. He promised me the farm." His outburst shattered the fragile calm. The judge, however, remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the document. "Mr. Worthington," the judge said, his voice firm, "I am merely reading the deceased's final wishes as dictated in this legally binding document." Mark sank back into his seat, breathing heavily, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. The weight of Grandpa's truth was settling, cold and sharp over the entire room. A profound stillness descended upon the courtroom, heavier and more potent than any silence I'd ever known. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was the absorption of a truth, a collective intake of breath held for far too long. The judge's voice, which had boomed with Grandpa's last, carefully chosen words, now seemed to echo from a distant memory, leaving behind a vacuum. My gaze drifted, almost instinctively, to Luke. His face, usually a mask of smug entitlement or simmering resentment, was utterly blank. The color had drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking ashen, like a statue carved from chalk. He didn't move, didn't even blink, his eyes fixed on some invisible point in the air, the very picture of a man whose carefully constructed world had just imploded. I felt no surge of triumph, no vindictive satisfaction. Instead, a strange, bittersweet melancholy settled over me. It wasn't about the money, not anymore, and perhaps it never truly had been for Grandpa either. It was about the words, the clarity, the quiet strength that had permeated his final testament, cutting through years of silence and misjudgment. My throat felt tight, a lump forming as I fought to process the raw emotion swirling within me. The rustle of papers, a hushed whisper from the gallery, slowly filtered back into my awareness, breaking the spell of complete quiet. "Mr. Davies," my lawyer Sarah murmured beside me, her voice soft, almost reverent. That was quite something. Her eyes, though empathetic, held a glint of professional satisfaction. She knew, as I did, that this wasn't just a legal victory. It was a testament to a bond that Luke had tried so desperately to sever. I could only nod, unable to form a coherent response. The air in the room, previously thick with tension, now felt charged with a different kind of energy, one of quiet revelation. Luke's lawyer, a stout man with a perpetually furrowed brow, finally broke his own stupor, leaning in to whisper urgently to my brother. Luke didn't react, his gaze still vacant, his shoulders slumped as if under an unbearable weight. It struck me then that perhaps for him this wasn't just about the will. It was about the public exposure of his spite, the undeniable proof that Grandpa had seen through his machinations, that the love he craved and resented had been extended, perhaps even offered to me in a way he couldn't comprehend. The reality was sharper, more painful, than any verbal confrontation could have been. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper that shattered everything. Grandpa's words hadn't condemned Luke outright, but had gently, firmly, laid bare his nature, contrasted it with a different path, a different kind of legacy. He had articulated a truth that had hovered unspoken between us for years, a truth that now echoed in the sudden, echoing silence of the room. It was a silence that spoke volumes, painting a clearer picture of my family's dynamics than any shouting match ever could. My eyes drifted to the judge, who, after a moment of contemplation, cleared his throat. His expression was no longer one of professional detachment, but held a hint of profound respect, perhaps even sadness. He seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, the human drama that had just unfolded before him, far beyond the dry legal text. The atmosphere was heavy, yet lighter somehow, as if a great suffocating weight had been lifted from my chest, replaced by a clarity that was both freeing and, surprisingly, lonely. The courthouse corridors, moments before, filled with the sharp echoes of my brother's disbelief and the judge's calm, authoritative voice, now felt like a hollowed-out tomb. Each step I took, away from the heavy oak doors, seemed to amplify the quiet hum in my ears, a stark contrast to the storm that had just raged. "It's over, isn't it?" I murmured to myself, the words feeling thin and insubstantial in the vast silence. My grandpa's final words, read aloud with such deliberate clarity by the judge, resonated with a new, profound meaning. "True legacy," he'd written, "isn't measured in what we leave behind in vaults, but what we cultivate in hearts. To my grandsons, I leave not a fortune to divide, but a challenge to unite." The full weight of that statement had hit me then, a spiritual tremor that shook me more than any legal decree could. What a cunning, beautiful mind he possessed. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. I inhaled deeply, trying to purge the lingering tension from my lungs. He always knew, didn't he? I thought, a soft smile touching my lips. Grandpa had a way of seeing right through us, not just me and my brother, but through the whole charade of appearances we often presented to the world. I remembered him saying, years ago, during one of our quiet fishing trips, "James, the biggest treasures are often hidden in plain sight. You just need eyes to see them." Back then I'd nodded, not fully grasping the depth of his words, thinking he was talking about a particularly elusive trout. Now, it was clear he spoke of something far grander. A streetcar rumbled past, its metallic screech momentarily breaking the quietude, yet failing to shatter the contemplative stillness within me. My brother's furious outburst, "This isn't fair. He promised me everything. You manipulated him," still echoed, but it sounded distant now, like background noise. It was a predictable reaction, fueled by years of expectation and entitlement. "He never promised anything but wisdom, Mark." I'd wanted to retort, but had held my tongue, knowing words were useless in the face of such deep-seated resentment. Grandpa's true will wasn't about money or property. It was about forcing us to look inward, to find common ground, or perhaps to define our paths independently, free from the burden of an inheritance that could only divide. I found a bench in a small, deserted park across the street, the cold iron seeping through my coat as I sat down. The sun, a pale disk behind a veil of clouds, offered little warmth. Is this what true freedom feels like? I wondered aloud, my voice barely a whisper against the rustling of dry leaves. For so long, the impending will had hung over us like a storm cloud, casting long shadows on every interaction, every shared memory. My brother saw it as a prize. I saw it as a looming obligation. Now, it was stripped bare, reduced to a single poignant challenge. "You see, James," Grandpa had once told me, his eyes twinkling, "a man truly owns nothing until he understands what he can give away." That simple phrase, once a mere musing, now felt like a guiding star. The path forward, for the first time in a long time, felt clear, though not easy. My relationship with Mark was, by all accounts, fractured beyond immediate repair. "He'll never forgive this, will he?" I mused, the thought bringing a pang of sorrow, not anger. It wasn't about forgiveness for me, but for Grandpa's final wise maneuver. He'd forced us into a corner, not to punish, but to illuminate. My grandfather, through his absence, was still teaching us lessons far more valuable than any sum of money. The true legacy wasn't just his words, but the space he created for us to grow, even if that growth meant painful separation. My mind drifted to the old shed behind Grandpa's house, a place that always smelled of sawdust, oil, and forgotten dreams. It wasn't the will itself, or even the inheritance, that mattered anymore. It was the echo of his voice, clear as a bell, in the judge's chambers. Sometimes, James, the greatest wealth isn't what you hold, but what you build, what you overcome. Those words, once a simple encouragement during a botched carpentry project, now resonated with a weight I hadn't understood. I found myself there a week later, picking up a dull plane, the wood still carrying the faint scent of Grandpa's pipe tobacco. The light filtering through the grimy window painted stripes across the dusty floorboards. My brother's angry shouts, his venomous claims that I was nothing, that I was a parasite. They seemed to dissipate in this quiet space, replaced by a profound, almost aching calm. I traced the grain of an old unfinished pine plank, feeling the rough texture under my thumb. "You know, Gramps," I whispered into the stillness, "I think I finally get it." The truth about his will wasn't a punishment for my brother, nor was it merely a reward for me. It was a final, profound lesson. He wanted us to see beyond the material, to understand that character and resilience were the true legacies. My brother's presence, the dark cloud he'd cast over so much of my early life, began to fade. It wasn't a sudden erasure, but a slow, gentle dissolution, like mist lifting from a valley. I wasn't just walking away from a legal battle. I was walking towards a clarity I hadn't known I craved. The air felt lighter, the burden of expectation, of needing to prove myself, finally easing from my shoulders. It was just me, the quiet hum of memory, and the lingering, almost palpable warmth of a love that spanned generations, a love that understood. The hum of the old grandfather clock in the quiet living room, once a source of comfort, now just a persistent echo in my mind. The dust motes danced in the afternoon light, oblivious to the storm that had passed through our lives. After everything, after the judge's calm, clear voice had cut through the tension and the whispers, a different kind of silence had fallen. It wasn't empty, but heavy with the weight of truth revealed, of bonds stretched beyond repair. I watched a lone robin land on the windowsill, its small head cocked, observing the world with an innocence I suddenly envied. There was no grand victory, no sense of triumph, just a deep weariness. Daniel, my brother, had left without a word, his face a mask of bitter shame. I hadn't chased him, hadn't called out. What would I even say? That winning wasn't worth the cost of losing him completely? That some things, once broken, can never truly be pieced back together, no matter how many apologies are offered? The will, Grandpa's final testament, lay on the polished mahogany table, no longer a weapon but a simple document. Its words had resonated with his spirit, not just his wealth. He'd known, I realized then, he'd known exactly what he was doing. His last wishes weren't about division, but about a final, desperate attempt at unity, a final lesson he needed us to learn, even if it ripped us apart in the process. It was a gamble, and in our case, it had failed. He always wanted us to be better. I murmured to the empty room, my voice a soft, almost inaudible sigh. Always saw the potential, even when we couldn't. The scent of old books and dried lavender, so quintessentially Grandpa, seemed to linger in the air, a gentle reminder of his ever-present wisdom. I walked over to his old armchair, the worn leather cool beneath my fingertips, imagining him there, his spectacles perched on his nose, a knowing smile playing on his lips. The real inheritance, I understood now, wasn't the property or the investments. It was the legacy of his character, the quiet resilience, the belief in the inherent good of people, even when they disappointed him. He had faced his own trials, I knew, but always with a steadfast heart. His words, read aloud by the judge, had been a mirror, forcing us to confront our own reflections, stripped bare of pretense. I picked up a small, smooth river stone from his desk, one he'd kept as a paperweight for as long as I could remember. It felt cool and solid in my palm, a tangible piece of his unchanging nature. He had told me once that even the most turbulent rivers eventually find their calm, their waters smoothing the rough edges of the world. Perhaps he hoped the same for us, for our fractured family. The setting sun cast long shadows through the window, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful, a perfect, quiet ending to a day that had felt anything but. Life would go on, yes, but it would be irrevocably altered. A chapter closed, but the story wasn't over. It had simply shifted, redefined by the echoes of a grandfather's love and the bitter truth of a brother's betrayal. I thought of the future, unwritten and uncertain. Would Daniel ever reach out? Would time truly heal wounds so deep? I didn't know, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace in that uncertainty. Grandpa had shown me that some questions don't have immediate answers, that some journeys require patience, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in simply letting go. As the last sliver of sunlight faded, the room sank into a soft twilight, the silence deepening. I stood there, holding the river stone, feeling the faint, cool breeze drift through the open window, a final whisper carrying the day's last breath. His legacy wasn't just in the pages of a will, but in the quiet, enduring beat of my own heart, forever shaped by his love, his lessons, and the raw, undeniable truth he had forced us all to face.